an imperfect YouTube video on karma and food is better than no video on karma and food. So that's the topic of the day, right? Eating without sin. That word, sin, which we'll unpack. Eating without sin, the question of karma and food. I want to start with a little short story. A year ago, I went to an Ayurvedic retreat for like a week. And I spent about a week there. And during that week, I wrote a really arrogant, angry letter to Bhakta Dominique, to a mutual friend of ours from our Polish outreach work in Poland. He's a good man. We've had our we're in disagreements in the past, but I wrote him this like totally unnecessarily angry letter, like, and afterwards, I apologized afterwards, and so a year later, like about a month ago, I went again to that same place, and I had an Ayurvedic 1-2 week retreat just to try to get hello Hare Krishna. Sort of a checkup, right? And after that, I recognized those same sort of feelings of anger and just bad consciousness. Now, I hesitated in telling you the story because I don't want to put the blame, for my misbehavior on someone's cooking. Okay, but I do believe, for better or for worse, that among other factors, and me, taking full responsibility at the end of the day, the food I was eating, I'm convinced had an effect on my consciousness. So, we all eat, unless we're breatharians. You've heard of the breatharians? There are some cases of... I know one dude from Brazil. He's a breatharian. Like, he hasn't eaten solid food in years, and he's a little chubby, and he drinks. He drinks Coca-Cola, orange juice, water. He doesn't eat anything. So unless we're breatharians, basically we have to eat. So the issue of eating and the issue of how to eat spiritually and how do we incorporate the act of eating in a God-conscious life is an issue that relates to all of us. And then more specifically, the issue of sin, and I'll unpack that term, but the issue of act of eating in such a way that doesn't harm other beings or doesn't bring in karmic reactions, right, is a question that, well, at least spiritualists who try to spiritualize all aspects of their life deal with and think about, right? So to answer that question, I want to look at basically two important verses from our main sacred text, the Bhagavad Gita. Because these two verses, really do address this issue of food, and so we'll develop that theme a little bit and read a few sentences from, not just the verses, but also a few sentences from Srila Prabhupada's commentary to those verses, because we tend to read, we do read primarily Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, so he wrote commentaries, and so there's a few sentences that I want to touch upon to answer this question, and then I have a few cool video excerpts showing, illustrating a few of my points. So the first verse I want to talk about is verse number 13 of the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. I think we discussed it on campus the other day. And I inversed the order that Krishna speaks. Like there's two sentences, I inversed them just for the sake of the discussion. So in verse 13 of chapter 3, Krishna, as Prabhupada would call the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or in French, Dieu la personne suprême. As an anecdote for followers of Prabhupada, when the books of Prabhupada were translated into French, one of his early students there, Jyotirmayi, who's still around. She lives in the south of France. She's like one of the big activists in France for animal rights. And so she was like in charge of translating Prabhupada's books into French. And so she asked him, like, well, can we translate the term Supreme Personality of Godhead as Dieu la personne suprême, which literally means God, Krishna, God the Supreme Person. Krishna, Dieu la personne suprême, God the Supreme Person. Krishna, God the Supreme Person. And Prabhupada, according to her, said, yes, go ahead. And that's why in the French translation of all of Prabhupada's books, the term Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is translated as Krishna, Dieu la personne suprême. Unfortunately, that's not the case in Spanish, which is a tragedy because being a Latin language, Portuguese, Italian, and Spanish should also be translated like that, logically. Anyway, putting aside linguistics, Krishna says, chapter 3, verse 3, those who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin. The devotees of the Lord, however, are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. So this Krishna establishes this notion of not only just a sacrifice, but food, offering food or eating food that's been offered to God as a component of sacrifice. And interestingly, in the commentary, Prabhupada, puts together the notion of the chanting of Krishna's name and the eating of food offered to Krishna kind of in one thing. Like he talks about, even though the verse is about food, in the commentary, Prabhupada talks about the chanting of Krishna's holy name. But there's one sentence in there, in the commentary, which I find relevant, and I want to read it to you. Prabhupada says, the devotees of the Supreme Lord are always in love with the Lord, and therefore cannot accept anything without first offering it to the Supreme Person. Ironically, for me, it makes me think of like professional sport players. Like, you've got Stephen Curry or whatever, LeBron James, who scores a game-winning, point basket, or someone, Lionel Messi scores you see a lot of professional sports people who they get glorified and they go like, no, it's not me. And they point to the sky, right? It's about God. Because they don't want to accept that glory for themselves. They just want to deflect it to God. So in that same sort of mood, Prabhupada is saying that devotees of God, God-conscious people love God, and because they love God, they don't want to accept anything without first offering it to God. Right? And so the same thing with food. The same thing with food. In this tradition, a God-conscious person, although acknowledging that all food comes from God, and therefore giving thanks to God, goes, we could say, a step further, and offers that food to God with love, as an offering first, right? And that act of offering food to God with devotion, and that's the next verse I want to talk about, indemnifies the person from karma, from sin. Unpacking the term pop, I'm not a Sanskrit scholar at all, but from what I understand, the word pop is a little different from the sort of a Judeo-Christian notion of sin, in the sense that pop is more an act that distances you. And you also find that in Christian circles, an idea that, sin distances you from God. So you've got that same notion here with pop, like doing something that establishes a distance, a disconnect, a state of viyoga, as opposed to yoga with God. Before going to the second verse, something that's really interesting, I think, is that this notion of offering food to God, in a monotheistic context, or to gods, plural, and goddesses in a polytheistic context, is something you find in our own, Western history. I'm not a scholar of Greek literature, but it is a fact that either in the Iliad or in the Odyssey, there's a scene where some famous, warrior, a warrior comes back from war, wounded, like seriously wounded. He comes back to his home or to his palace, and the attending queen like sees her son or her husband or her brother like bloody, and instead of giving him like, you know, nectar to drink, some juice or whatever, she tells the attendants, go quickly offer the drink to the gods, before giving the drink to the wounded soldier. So much the notion of not eating anything before first offering to the gods and goddesses was established as a fundamental cultural principle. So I find that really interesting. So here's the second verse, right? So we got the first verse. Krishna, God, we believe, says those who, when you eat food that hasn't been offered to God, you're eating food you're basically eating sin. I mean, that's the actual words of Krishna. You have food that has, for example, some consciousness of the person who cooks it. We'll get into that later. The karma of the killing of the animal or even the plant, and that's the issue we have to deal with. Like, well, how do you, unless you're breatharian, how do you eat in a way that's, you know, not getting a reaction to even killing a plant if you're, you know, plant-based in your diet? So here is verse number 26 of chapter 9, where Krishna answers that question. A famous verse, Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam Yome Bhaktya Prayachati Taraham Bhaktuparitam Ashnami Prayatatmanaha. Krishna says, if one offers me with love, so here's that key point, love. If one offers me with love and devotion, a leaf, a flower, or fruit, or water, I will accept it. And he doesn't mention meat. That's interesting because in the commentary, Prabhupada says that, you know, like if Krishna wanted meat, he would have said, like, offer me meat, but he doesn't. He says, offer me plant-based things, earth, leaf, flower, fruit, water. This is a big plus for those bhakti yogis who are vegan, because there's no mention of milk products in there. Right? So if one offers me with love, and the Sanskrit in there is bhakti, right? If one offers me with love, with devotion, those four things, I will accept it. And please listen to the commentary. Here's like 3 or 4 sentences that encapsulate what Krishna is saying here. Prabhupada says, he refers to this verse 13 of chapter 3 that we just read. He says, in the 3rd chapter, verse 13, Sri Krishna explains that only the remains of sacrifice are purified and fit for consumption by those who are seeking advancement in life and release from the clutches of the material entanglement. In other words, those who offer their food without offering, those who eat, who cook, or who offer their food, those who do not make an offering of their food, are said to be eating only sin. In other words, their every mouthful is simply deepening their involvement in the complexities of material nature. But preparing nice, simple vegetable dishes, offering them before the picture or deity of Lord Krishna, and bowing down and praying for him to accept such a humble offering, enable one to advance steadily in life, to purify the body, and to create fine brain tissues, which will lead to clear thinking. Above all, so listen to this again, this theme of bhakti, of devotion. Above all, the offering should be made with an attitude of love. Krishna has no need of food since he already possesses everything that be, yet he will accept the offering of one who desires to please him in this way. The important element in preparation, in serving, and in offering is to act with love for Krishna. So there's this notion of attitude, of offering to God with love, as an expression of love. And I want to share with you now a little audio clip, an audio clip of Prabhupada, of our founder, who in one of his lectures, I'll tell you right now, it's in, I don't have the exact reference, but you can be sure it's from 1966 to 1977. And I'll show you the screen so you can read the words. And you can listen to what he says. And he talks about it, and you'll see like he chokes up. That's why it's kind of a famous excerpt of all the thousands of hours of recorded lectures that we have of Prabhupada. This passage is kind of famous because it exemplifies we believe, I certainly believe, the emotion of someone who's very, very, very advanced spiritually, who has a lot of love for God. And here, picture speaks 1,000. I mean, here we go. So he just said, you know, what is the value of your offering? So he's just talking about, like, let's say you're making an offering to Krishna or to God of food. What's the value of it? And you'll see what he says next.
Therefore, the real thing is bhaktya. Real thing is your feeling. Krishna, kindly take it. I have no qualification. I am most rotten fallen. But I have brought this thing for you. Please take. This will be accepted.
So he ends that lecture like that. It's quite touching, right? I've brought this thing. I'm nothing, but you know, I've brought this thing for you. Please accept it. You know, again, the expression of bhakti, of devotion, which is the cornerstone of the whole Krishna philosophy, of the whole Krishna tradition. This expression of love, of devotion. So back to my points. So when one, according to our philosophy, when one offers food, when someone offers food to Krishna with love, as we see here in this extreme example, there's something that Christians call, we could use the same term, transubstantiation, where, you know, in the Catholic tradition, like that piece of bread, that round piece of bread that you eat is considered to be non-different from the body of Christ. And as a matter of fact, from what I understand, that's kind of like one of the differences between the Protestant tradition and the Catholic tradition, like the actual ontological, you know, what is that piece of bread, you know? And so the Catholics say, no, it is the body of Christ, and Protestants will say, no, it's more of a symbolic thing. But taking the Catholic side here, because our idea, or the Krishna Bhakti tradition, I would say, is closer. It's not just symbolic. The food is actually transformed. That's why we have this expression, karma-free, a karma-free diet, you know, a karma-free food. By coming in contact with God through love and devotion, God, like, you know, takes away the sin or the karma of that food. And to exemplify this, I want to quote for you Lord Caitanya. Now, for those who may not remember who Lord Caitanya is, he's here on the altar, he's here, he's over there. Lord Caitanya, we believe, is Krishna himself, who appeared in 1486 and who inaugurated this sort of renaissance of chanting the holy name and this renaissance of bhakti, of devotion to Krishna. And so there's a passage in a much later text in the Bhagavad Gita, a 16th century text, which is a hagiography of Lord Caitanya. And he is quoted to have said in that text, listen to this. So this is Lord Caitanya, who we believe is as authoritative as Krishna, saying, and he's talking about food offered to Krishna. So here's some, you know, there's some like Indian spices, because we're talking West Bengal, and maybe if he was here, he would have said, you know, check this vegan burger out, or you know, or if it was in Italy, maybe he would have talked about the basil in the spaghetti or something. But here he's saying these ingredients, such as sugar, camphor, black pepper, cardamom, cloves, butter, spices, and licorice, are all material. Everyone has tasted these material substances before. However, in these ingredients there are extraordinary tastes and uncommon fragrances. Just taste them and see the difference in the experience. Sometimes, you know, you have people like, actually last week, some lady here was saying, yeah, I love the Krishna food. But it's not like we cook some like far out recipes. It's just pretty basic. A lot of it is really basic. Most of it, you know, like one of the days at the Krishna lunch at University of Florida is just spaghetti, right? But we believe that if it's offered with devotion, then Krishna has accepted it. And just see what Lord Caitanya says. Just taste them and see the difference in the experience. Apart from the taste, even the fragrance pleases the mind and makes one forget any other sweetness besides its own. Therefore, he concludes, it is to be understood that the spiritual nectar of Krishna's lips has touched these ordinary ingredients and transferred to them all their spiritual qualities. So here, you know, Lord Caitanya is speaking about God's lips. Well, this tradition is a hardcore personalist tradition, in the sense that not only is it monotheistic, but it's personalistic to the max. It's really believed that the absolute truth is impersonal, is an energy, and so on, because everything comes from him, including energy. But in the most confidential aspect, God, or the absolute truth, is a person with a spiritual form. So these are not material lips, they're spiritual lips from the spiritual body, eternal body of God. And so Lord Chaitanya is saying here that, God with his lips, literally, has tasted this food. And therefore, you come in contact with God, you get influence. So food touched by God gets God's qualities. The example of the sun, like you put some ordinary stuff on the street, and with the influence of the sun, that thing gets the thing, whatever it be, even if it's kind of nasty or excrements or whatever it may be, just by the power of the sun, there's a prophylactic effect on the substance. So what to speak of the supreme pure, namely God, right? And so by consequence, when someone comes in contact with food offered to God, then what's the result? Purification. Or as the Catholics would say, union, right? Or communion with God. So therefore, the tradition believes that when someone, and when I say someone, I don't want to say only humans, because this is the next point I want to touch on. When someone, whether human or animal, comes in contact with food offered to God, then there's a component of purification that takes place. Of purification. Can I make a small little parenthesis? Well, allow me, let's say, to make a little parenthesis in the history of Christianity here. So I was thinking of bringing in, views of some Christian scholars about how Christians should be vegetarian. But I thought there's not enough time. But I did want to touch on one point. And it's a point that at least Andrew Lindsay, the Reverend Andrew Lindsay, who was my professor, when I was doing my master's in England. He's an Anglican priest, a published author, like the world authority on Christian vegetarianism. And one of his main arguments is that Thomas Aquinas, God bless his soul, is basically responsible for having disconnected mainstream Christians from, or disconnected or made larger what shouldn't be any space between, how God supposedly sees humans and supposedly sees animals. Like, humans are totally set apart from animals. This idea that animals have some sort of life breath, granted some sort of spirit, but they don't have a soul, a rational soul as humans do. So that apparently was, brought in by St. Thomas Aquinas. So it's all God's creation, but animals don't have a soul in the same way as humans do. That notion supposedly can be traced to Thomas Aquinas, right? But in the Bhagavad Gita, the idea of self transcends species, transcends what to speak of skin color, of sex, and so on. That very famous verse, Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmani Gavihashtini Shuni Chaiva Swapake Cha Pandita Samadarshina. Pandit, someone who has spiritual vision. Jorge G. Someone who has spiritual vision, doesn't see the external body, whether it's a man or a woman, or what to speak of even, whether it's a plant, or whether it's an animal, or whether it's a fish, right? Because the idea is the soul is the real person, and the soul exists in any body, not just the human body. Hello, not just the human body. In this effect, we have the story of Lord Chaitanya. Maybe someone can give a seat to. Yeah, here you go. Please sit on that. We're speaking about food and the relationship between food and karma and consciousness, and So there's the example of Lord Caitanya again, when it's described in that 16th century text, when Lord Caitanya was giving remnants of a coconut pulp that he was giving to a dog, the dog that belonged to a person called Shivananda Sen. And the text describes that just by eating this food, which was touched and eaten by Lord Caitanya himself, who again, we believe is Krishna, that dog didn't have to wait even till he left his body, as we say, but just just got transported to the spiritual world. And it's kind of unclear whether he went in his own physical material body, or just but the idea is that just by coming in contact with food offered to Krishna or eaten by Krishna himself, in this case Lord Caitanya, that dog just went directly to the spiritual world, right? To the spiritual world. And that's why I want to show you another clip here where this principle of seeing not just humans as recipients of food offered to God and benefiting them, but animals as well. So here's the example of Lord Caitanya that I just cited, but there's an example, again, of coming back to our sort of modern day example, par excellence, Prabhupada. One of his students, Narayan Prabhu, who you know, I'm sure, tells the story of how he was in front of Prabhupada, and Prabhupada started asking him, "Do you see this ant on this table?" You know the story? Do you see this ant on this table? And according to Narayan, he couldn't. There was no ant on the table. And so Prabhupada was like, we gotta help this ant right here to make spiritual. And I'll show it to you. I find it kind of humorous, and it illustrates our point. So here's Narayan speaking about the invisible ant, and pay attention to what Prabhupada says about how he can help that ant. And he'll mention the word prasadam. He'll mention feeding the ant prasadam. Prasadam is the Sanskrit term for mercy, which in this case means food offered to Krishna, right?
So then Srila Prabhupada looked at me intensely, as though that the ant issue now being solved, he wanted to get on to real business, and he said, "My duty," he said, "is to my job," he said, "is to understand what is my duty to this ant." Oh no. I said, not only there's an ant that I can't see, but now I have a duty to it. I said, what am I going to do? He said, somehow, Prabhupada looked at me beseechingly almost, somehow I have to help this ant. He said, and maybe I can chant. And he said, reaches down, he says, maybe I can chant Hare Krishna. Or he went like this, feed it a little prasadam. He said, if we can help one ant become Krishna conscious, then our whole movement is a glorious success.
In other words, if an animal who's actually not an animal, he's a soul just like you, just like me. It's just that we have a human body, according to our text, and the animal in his evolution in the reincarnation cycle happens to be in an animal body. That's the only difference. But in the eyes of God, God loves the soul or the person inside that ant body exactly with the same amount of love as the soul in a human body, and therefore will benefit from coming in contact with food offered to God in the same amount as a human. And therefore, maybe we can help this ant by eating it prasad. And then he concluded, and this is what Narayan remembers, he said, Prabhupada then said, if we can help this ant to make progress to go back to Krishna, then our entire movement is a grand success. So sometimes we lament that, no one's coming, and, we have a pretty slow growth. Well, we should be happy if we can just give a little bit of, remnants of food that we didn't finish to, some ants or something. And with the faith that, it's stated, with the faith that if an animal eats food offered to Krishna, then they bypass all the different incarnations they would have to go through by the natural course of, reincarnation according to nature, and they get promoted to a human body in one life. That's pretty far out. And for humans, the statement is there that if we eat food offered to God or to Krishna, then a human life is guaranteed in the next life. Because, according to our tradition, you can go back down in the reincarnation cycle. In some Buddhist sects, or not called sects, you just, once you hit the human form, you may not get nirvana or whatever, but you continue coming back as a human. But according to the Gita, sky's the limit, and you can go up and down. And of course, it's an interesting question because, like, okay, let's say you eat prasadam in one life, but then and maybe you come back as a human in the next life. But what if your next life you don't eat prasadam and you commit like some really, really horrible, violent, and you commit suffering to others? You're going to have to pay for it somehow, and maybe you would have to come back as an animal. But anyway, the principle is there that coming in contact with food offered to God has tremendous purificatory effect. That's the idea. That's the idea. Now, the consciousness, right, of how you eat the food, how you honor that food offered to God, and who you are in terms of offering it. And again, now I want to show you this passage of where Narayan talks about his experience of eating food offered to Krishna on the birthday of Prabhupada's guru. So, like, this idea of guru, disciple, or teacher, student. On the birthday of the spiritual teacher, the student, has extra devotion for his teacher and wants to, make an extra offering of love to his teacher and gratitude. So Narayan is saying on the day of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's appearance, who was Prabhupada's spiritual teacher, Prabhupada cooked a feast, offered it to Krishna and to his spiritual teacher. And then you'll see Narayan says, and so we were just like kind of, as he himself says, we were just kind of hippies and coming down from our LSD trips, and we were having a talk, and we started eating, and then this.
I remember one time he cooked for his spiritual master's appearance or disappearance day on the La Cienega temple here. And he cooked a pot of khichdi, which he said was his spiritual master's favorite dish. And it is a wonderful dish. And he cooked it using urdal, which is not just the split urdal, but the polished urdal. So it came out with a very creamy consistency. And he made a pot about this size, about half full. And there were 30 of us in that room. And there are many other dishes too. So we started out by tasting the prasadam that Prabhupada had cooked, and everyone was in a jolly mood because it was a holiday, and we were observing the appearance or disappearance. I think it was the appearance day of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And that picture of Prabhupada cooking at the stove is that occasion when he was cooking that khichdi. It's a famous picture. And we came out, and everybody got a dab of khichdi on their plate. And by that time, it was cold. And I think Prabhupada wasn't there. He had already gone to his quarters to do things. And everybody was in a jolly mood. We were all talking and chatting. And we all reached over with our fingers, because in those days we ate with our fingers. And we picked up the khichdi and we popped it in our mouths. And all of a sudden, this conversation died out everywhere. This was not some external ceremony that we were honoring this prasadam. We were not in the mood to honor anything. We were having a good time and chatting and jolly. As soon as that prasadam touched our tongues, we fell silent. We sat there in dead, icy, ice cave silence, tasting grain after grain of it until it was all gone, and then we searched for stray grains on our plates. And then everybody in the room, by common mutual consent, began crawling on their all fours.
Crawling on their all fours. Like, imagine, like you're crawling. You're like, you can't even walk. You're like crawling towards the pot.
Towards the pot in the middle of the room where there was still a little bit left. And we all reached in simultaneously. We were taking little pieces out of the pot. Our eyes were staring straight ahead. No one spoke a word until there was nothing left. Then we all went back and sat down and sat there in silence for almost an hour. Something about that prasadam was so charged with what must have been something like Gopi Bhava. It was too much ecstasy involved in that prasadam that we were struck by it. Every feeling, the exquisite, excruciating feeling that Prabhupada feels for his spiritual master was present, and we had a chance. And then we realized that Prabhupada had given that to us like an extra special little present or benediction, that he'd allowed us to open the door a little bit and peek at what his world was like.
So the lessons to learn from this, like when someone, Krishna himself says, as one approaches me, I reward him or her accordingly. Excuse me, I have a cramp. As one approaches me, I reward him accordingly. So if someone who has phenomenal love for God, approaches God and makes a phenomenal offering of just phenomenal love to God, then God's going to reciprocate. And then if you eat that offering, you can't even contain it, right? The attitude of the person eating it also is important. It's kind of like quantum mechanics. You know, the observer affects the end result of what the observer is looking at. Like in quantum mechanics, that's one thing I learned about quantum. You know, I suck at mechanics, but you could confirm, right? It's kind of like right? The observer affects what they see. Like if there's no observer, the phenomena kind of whatever does this. But as soon as someone's looking at it, you know, it changes the way it functions. So in a similar way, the attitude with which one, you know, honors food offered to God may grant different results. And to illustrate this point, there's the story of Ramanuja Acharya, one great saint in South India, going back thousands of years, or hundreds and hundreds. He was what, in the I don't know what century, but way back. And there's this famous story where he threw some of he had eaten food offered to Krishna, and then he threw it in a pond, and some fish jumped up and grabbed it. And kind of like the dog that we just heard about with Lord Caitanya, that fish just like went back to the spiritual world, like boom, in front of all the students of Ramanuja Acharya, who asked their teacher, like, how come? Like this fish, like a fish, like a fish, come on. Okay, he's a soul, but he's in a fish body, for God's sake. He just went, he got liberated from the samsara cycle, went back to the kingdom of God. And we're your disciples, and we serve you every day, and we eat, your own remnants of food that's been offered to Krishna every day, and we're still here. And he said, yeah, because you do it, you're offensive when you eat it. You have ulterior motives. But that fish was totally innocent, so because he was offenseless when he ate that, he went back to the spiritual world. So, introspection and just the issue of respect and remembering. That's why, like, devotees, have this prayer, Sharira Vidyaja Jandriyataika, this famous prayer by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that they recite, like, either in Bengali or in their local language before each meal. It's kind of far up. My dear Lord, this body is a lump of ignorance, and the senses are a network of paths leading to death. Of all the senses, the tongue is the most voracious and uncontrollable. But you, dear Lord, are very kind to us. You have kindly sent us this mercy. In other words, food offered to you, to help us conquer our senses, to help us control our urges, our senses, which are kind of like wild horses that run left and right? Therefore, let us take this mercy to our full satisfaction. Prabhupada used to say that newcomers should walk away waddling like a duck, right? They should eat so much food offered to God. Let us take this prasadam to our full satisfaction and glorify their lordships and ask for their mercy. So, if you are not offering your food to God, then do it. Try it out. Do it. And it can range from a minimum sort of like, thank you, my Lord. Thank you. That acknowledgement of just acknowledging, kind of like the sports person, like, thank you for this food, which is something you definitely find in the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? Like before each meal, like, let's thank the Lord, right? So where it's that, or, like full on like an altar with a plate that is designated just for God, and no one eats from that plate, and you take a sample from every preparation that you cooked and you put it on that little plate, and then you put that plate with all the samples of each preparation you've cooked on the altar, and you just simply ask Krishna, my Lord, and you can have a picture of a spiritual teacher that you're kind of like imagining you're assisting in making that offering because you feel unqualified, kind of like we heard Prabhupada saying, That's why in the idea of offering food or offering items to a picture or a deity of Krishna, traditionally it's done via one's spiritual teacher, who one considers much more pure and advanced than oneself, and therefore one is acting as sort of the assistant of one's teacher in offering food to Krishna. So these subtle things, but they're beautiful. But the principle is, please accept this food. Please accept this humble offering. A story that I didn't think about telling it, but I love this story. according to our tradition, this is supposedly a true story, 15th century, 16th century, in the time of Lord Caitanya, you have this very advanced soul called Mukunda. He has a son, and who's like an 8-year-old boy or something. And Mukunda one day has to go to work or has to leave the house, and he has, deities at home of Krishna, and so they have a tradition of offering food to the deity every day. So he doesn't have time to cook, so he asks his son, "You please make the offering today. Like, just make the offering, I gotta go." His mother probably cooked or whatever. So the little boy brings the plate, the offering plate, and puts it in front of, this is not a picture here, in this case it's a statue of Krishna, and asks Krishna, "Okay, well, here, please eat." And according to the story, because in 99.999999999% of offerings of food to Krishna, it's believed that Krishna accepts the devotion with which the food is offered, but the food remains on the plate, right? But in this case, supposedly, because of this young boy's innocence and pure love for Krishna, that Krishna in his deity form was like, so the boy's like, "Why aren't you eating?" And the deity was just like, deity, like a statue, you don't move, right? And so the boy started like, "But come on, we offer, please eat it, please eat it." And according to the story, Krishna, melted by the love of this boy's heart, in his statue form, bent down and ate the food. I kid you not. I don't know what year was it when across the whole United States, or maybe it was the whole planet Earth, milk offerings to statues of Ganesh. Remember that miracle that took place?
Yeah, I wrote about it.
When was it? It was in 1998, 1997. For a day. I did it myself. I did it. Statues of Ganesh were accepting milk. Any offerings of milk you put to a statue of Ganesh, I swear to God.
It was the 21st of September of 95.
You remember that? I remember I was a monk living in the ashram in Los Angeles, and some Hindu lady who was living in the community had a deity of Ganesh, of Ganesh, that elephant, half man, half elephant demigod, or not the Supreme Lord, but great servant of. And I remember there was a line, the whole community wanted to try this out. And I remember I came and I had, she just put the milk on a spoon, and she had a little statue of Ganesh this size, which was made of white marble. I put the spoon of milk to Ganesh's trunk, and the milk disappeared. I swear to God. I saw it. And you can Google it you can Google it. It was far out. So this is not the first time it happens. But in this case, coming back to this boy, the deity ate the plate, the food offering. And so when the father, Mukunda, comes back, he asks his son, "Okay, bring the prasadam, bring the food offering, I want to eat," right? And the boy said, "Well, Krishna ate everything." He's like, "Yeah, okay, wait, stop joking, I'm hungry, come on." He's like, "No, Dad, he ate everything." And the father got angry because he thought his son was lying to him, that he had eaten the offering, right? And he didn't want to, but his son was like, no. And so he saw, wait a second. So the next day, he pretended like he had to leave. So he's like, "Oh, I gotta go, my son, you make the offering and stuff." So he pretended to leave, and then from outside, he looked through the window. And according to the text, he saw his son, same thing, "Okay, my dear Lord, please accept." And the statue's not moving. "Oh, come on, don't do this again. Please accept it." And finally, because of his, enthusiasm, the deity bent down and ate. And when his father saw that, he was flabbergasted. And from then on, he considered his son as his own guru, and considered that his son was just way more spiritually advanced than him. Imagine your own son offers a material thing to a deity of Krishna, and the deity actually bends down and eats it. Because those statues of Ganesh, it's the trunk didn't move, It was just it just disappeared when you put it in contact with here. So so if you're not offering your food to Krishna, offer it to Krishna. There's a very small chance the food will disappear. Very high chances the food will remain on the plate. And after a while, you just take it off that plate, put it in the original containers, whether it's for 5 mil, like in Poland, we Indra Swami and company distributes 500,000 plates of food offered to Krishna on a span of 5 days during this huge rock, it's called Poland Rock now festival, where 3 million, I don't know how many, 3 million people come, mostly, from the age of 16 to 30. and they line up, and then we got these huge wood oven. I mean, if you fall, you die, because it's so big, and they're like cooking like these big Russian guys, like cooking away in this heat, and then they offer a little sample to Krishna. They probably have just a painting or a photograph of Krishna. They offer the food, please accept. And fortunately, imagine everything disappeared. Krishna Kripa. Like, sorry guys, Krishna ate everything. No food for you guys today. So like that, whether it's really elaborate, whether it's in the mind, whether it's in the heart. Once, a short story for those who know Chandramouli Swami, a British congregation member from the ISKCON congregation in London told him one day, he said, I felt really bad because the other day I was at a business meeting, and so we went to lunch, and so I ordered a vegetarian pizza and a salad, and as the things came on my plate, I said to Krishna, my Lord, I'm really sorry, I can't make a proper offering. Please accept this summer offering, but I feel really bad. And we were driving in a car when I heard this story, and Chandramouli Swami said to him, he said, perhaps that was one of the best offerings you ever made to Krishna. And that really stuck. Because a name for Krishna is Bhavagrahi Janardhan. Janardhan, he who accepts the mood, the devotion, and not so much the actual offering. So maybe, even though like there may have been meat around him and wine and stuff like that, but in his heart he was kind of like in that mood of the little kid, the son of Mukunda, like, please accept it. And so maybe that was indeed one of his greatest offerings, even though there weren't bells and traditional dress and incense and all sorts of things, because it was the inside that counted, right? It was the inside that counted. So we're lucky to be able to eat food offered to God, and we should continue doing it. And in this way, we can eat our way back to the spiritual world, accompanied with the main thing we do, which is to chant God's holy name, which is the main component of this sacrifice. So if we combine this chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, with offering and honoring, as we say, food that's been offered with whatever devotion one can muster up, then we've got the good combination to be, spiritual in this lifetime, and then, if Krishna allows, for us to be transferred to his eternal abode when we leave our bodies. Thank you very much. Now we can do a 5-10 minute kirtan, and then we'll honor some food offered to Krishna.
Peter, somebody has a question? Are you open to that?
Yeah.
I just want to make one comment quickly that Prabhupada talking about offering with devotion is from the installation of the Rukmini Dwarkanath deities in LA on the July 16th of 1969.
Oh, that was the audio we heard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
1969. Cool.
Yeah, LA
In Los Angeles.
the installation.
Sweet.
Did anybody have any questions? I have a couple comments that other people should.
How about we just close with a kirtan, and then we just leave it open to discussion and. Okay. So I lead you. I chant. You chant, and I'll listen to you on the response. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Bhagavad Gita ki jai, food offered to Krishna or God ki jai.